and welcome to this week's edition of KIKAO, your weekly interactive agricultural program focusing on the big issues facing that sector on the African continent. And in a short while, we'll be having that conversation with experts on just what is the role of science, technology, and innovation in improving agriculture and food security. My name is Joe Agayo. First, let's set the stage for you with a cross-section of views from around Africa.
The cost of farming imeenda juu kwa sababu ya mbolea. Na sisi kama farmers hakuna pesa yenye tumetengewa kando kama wakulima. Mpaka wewe ujikaze na pesa yako mwenyewe. Na mbolea sahi the cheapest unanunua DAP na 6,300.
We don't have extension officers from the government, ama the county, ama the national government ambao anatupatia mawaida.
Kuna wakati tuliahidiwa watakuja kututembelea ili waangalie udongo, hiyo mchanga yetu iko na acid mingi sana, kwa hivyo haiendi pamoja na ile mimea tunapanda.
90 kg of maize is weighing around to 4,000, which is it will be very hard for so many people to buy.
We need to shift away from the traditional farmers' kind of methods of farming, and then again we need to empower those farmers with modern technologies.
We know what we have. We know what we lack. We should streamline our research activity towards what we lack so that to get what we want.
We need a socio-economic transformation of our countries by increasing productivity, by processing to add value, and to create jobs for youth and also for women.
Let's now join Dr. Canisius Kanangire, the Executive Director of AATF, with this panel of the week discussing the place of science, technology, and innovation in agriculture here in Africa.
Agriculture is the main economic activity for several countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. The sector contributes about 15% of the total gross domestic product of the continent. Across Africa, the agricultural sector is expanding very rapidly to meet the increasing demand for food and good nutrition. Various studies have demonstrated that science, technology, and innovation hold great potential in increasing the productivity and prosperity of farmers in Africa. But progress in translating innovative products into real impact at the farmers level has been relatively slow, resulting in persistence of poverty and food insecurity on the continent. With over 82% of the African population living in rural areas and wholly dependent on agriculture, the continent has no choice but to accelerate the adoption of such innovative technologies in order to transform its agriculture. On KIKAO, I will be speaking to policymakers, experts, and practitioners on the state of technology and innovation on the continent and how to accelerate progress. I'm Dr. Canisius Kanangire, the Executive Director of AATF, and my guests here today are Dr. Martin Bwalia, the Director of AUDA NEPAD, and Dr. Francis Nangayo, who is the Head of Regulatory Affairs at AATF. When we talk of agriculture, commitment, declarations, decisions have been taken to improve agriculture on the continent, to try and reach food security and improve nutrition of Africans. Where do we stand today when you look at the status of agriculture and the provision of food security on the continent?
I think it's good to start by saying that there is obviously massive progress from where we were, say, 3-4 decades ago. But again, the dissatisfaction comes from the fact that we definitely could have done far, far better than where we are in terms of agricultural performance, in terms of the value of agriculture, and even sometimes our mindset and understanding of why agriculture, what is agriculture. You did mention that a lot of our communities, especially in rural areas, are deriving livelihood 100% on agriculture, and we call it like that. You also did mention the issue of agriculture contribution to GDP. Probably that's where we need to stand. What do we mean by agriculture? What are we referring to? Because agriculture, when I get out of my house as a smallholder farmer growing some food crop on a quarter of a hectare, and I do that essentially for nothing more than food in my stomach, then we need to do something, because we even have had policies that sustained that kind of farming, where you're giving people 1 bag of fertilizer for a loan, 10 kg bag of seed, then there's no commercial value in that process. Yeah. And in fact, even for their own, it will not feed the family of 5, 6 all year round. So what I'm saying is that we need to come back to appreciating why agriculture, what is agriculture, and the contribution to the GDP is important in terms of value addition and government fiscals. But we have to start at the level where, how do we cultivate the energy of the populations? Is agriculture versus food in the stomach, that's okay. And you don't have to be a farmer in the first place. But we need to feed, and feed diet, nutritious foods, that's one, that's true. But the other key where we need, in fact, more energy is agriculture as a source of income. Real commercial employment and entrepreneurship for our population.
This calls for a kind of transformation and change of mindset in the farming industry as a whole. And this is not new, because in 2014, in the Malabo Declaration, they were already talking of the transformation of agriculture and make it a real engine for development. Yeah. How did they envision that transformation, which would be generated by the Malabo Declaration and all those commitments?
There was mention of transformation in Malabo Declaration in 2014. And I think that I must hail that bold step to think about African agriculture from a lens of transformation. Indeed, I think as a political statement that pointed in the right direction. But transformation has to be intentional. It has to be followed by action. I think the Malabo Declaration is on paper very, very clear. And what needed to be followed is walking that talk. The leadership of African countries needed to follow through when they go at country level to see that appropriate allocations, if not even in just one fell swoop, even if it is a graduated one, are committed towards the direction of Malabo Declaration.
What do you think are the main reasons then that the implementation did not follow, the targets are not being seen to happen in 2025 as it was envisioned? What do you think could be the key factors?
We do know that 20, 30 years before, we've made the same pronouncements. We have had CADAP. CADAP was in 2003. Before that, 2001, the NEPAD vision was also very clear on agriculture. There has been the Abuja Summit in 2006 on food security. And these have been very, very clear on what we need to do as a continent in terms of bringing agriculture to the level, and this is transformation, to the level where productivity into the food basket is able to feed the continent and even export. And from the agroecological point of view, we can do that 100 times over as a continent. We have agriculture where it's also a source of income, and I talk about employment, entrepreneurship for our people. We also are able to do that in the manner that is consistent with the environment, with climate, and all those factors. And therefore, as you are saying, the question becomes a different one. Why is what we know so well needs to happen is not happening?
Is not happening. We will take a pause and a break, and when we come back, we will see the key factors which could probably unlock the potential and see that all those political commitments could be implemented. Welcome back to the KIKAO taking place here in Kigali, Republic of Rwanda. If Africa had adopted and used technology and innovation in agriculture, then we would be able to produce enough food for our people. What does it mean here, bringing in technology and innovation?
We actually have got lessons about that. When fertilizer was introduced decades back, the message, the narrative, there was that nobody will starve ever again. We have had several instances where technology is introduced and you say, this is the end of the problem. Mechanization, it was the same thing. Climate smart agriculture, it was the same thing. This is what we came up also in the national dialogue last year. We went to 48, 49 countries in the United Nations-led food systems national dialogues. The countries were coming up to say, is this another list of priorities of what we need to do? We have several. We have Malabo, Kadap Malabo. We have the SDG. We have Agenda 23. So what will another list do? Many times, we have ventured for technical solutions, which are important, but they are not the whole. They are not even sometimes the main issue. Because if it was just science, technology, and innovation, and you put it there, and the solution is there, we would not be sitting here. We need to come back to why are these technologies, innovations, some of them working very well in some circumstances, have not caught wildfire, gone like wildfire.
Why are we still lagging behind? Why Africa cannot have the same performance as agriculture in other countries?
That comparative lens that you brought in has driven the picture quite clear that African agriculture, you look, has stagnated like for decades, with productivity per hectare averaging just 1.1, 1.5 if you're doing very well. And if you if you compare that with other developing regions of the world, then you see areas like Southeast Asia that were more or less having the same indicators like us, having made quantum leaps going upwards with the time. They must have done something to their agriculture. They must have adopted some innovations that transformed their agriculture. And that doesn't answer the question, it just shows how different we are. Riding on that bold political step of transformation, I think the other twin element that we need to bring in is then to say with the political direction going this way, to match that we need to then consciously go out to adopt agricultural productivity enhancement technologies. And those in themselves also call for an enabling environment, because new innovations, people who have studied innovations have talked about enemies of innovation. Sometimes new innovations, like a mobile phone, when it was coming on board, there are people who resisted it. We know how mobile telephony has transformed the world. So I think that we need a political enabling environment that could help us catalyze the adoption of productivity-enhancing technologies.
Doesn't it call for a certain level of prioritization of which technology? Because there is a huge range of technologies that were developed to address many different issues.
Recently, the African Union had to reform. President Kagame led the process for the reform of the African Union. And among the reasons were two factors. One was about being able to deliver results as a continent. And number two was about how do you get domestic resources to back up that development economic agenda of the continent instead of depending on development aid. And when you look at that, and coming back to your question, is that the continent has recognized that there was real issues that needs to be addressed in terms of delivering results and transformative results as at that. And one of them was to begin with the issue of leadership. We need champions. We need visionary individuals that are able to create a critical mass of interest and commitment to drive the process. Then you have to cultivate the citizenry interest and participation. Now, the issue is that the citizens, the populations, have to recognize in that vision of the leaders their own ambitions. This is when you talk about the phone. They have not adopted the phone because of somebody there, but they have recognized what they can do with it.
It meets their needs.
It meets their needs. So, and that needs to come up because it's the people. The people have to be part of the solution. And it's not doing it for them. They would do it for themselves insofar as we can recognize that and remain with enabling those factors that allows them to deliver the solution. When you combine these two, then you are going to identify what are the real on-the-ground challenges, including opportunities. When you come to infrastructure, you come to information, including data. You come to policies that are either sometimes you find with so many, sometimes we end up not lack of them, but conflicting policies. So all those factors begin to fall in place.
Yes.
Yeah? And that is where action, results, and transformation will happen.
Can happen.
Yeah.
Now, how do you prioritize, or what would be the priority of the African continent as far as agriculture is concerned, and with the aim of attaining food security?
I think that many studies have been done before. And even before making maybe this matter rather complex, if somebody talked about the threat of climate change manifesting itself in the form of weather variability, I think that does not need any lecture. When we were growing up, we used to think that maybe that's just a theory. But we see it. We see frequent and prolonged droughts disrupting agricultural production and so on and so forth. And even if a country were just to cherry pick and say, for the next 10 years, we as country X in Africa, we are going to prioritize climate change, followed by perhaps animal production or animal industry, agro-processing. In other words, trying to do our agriculture with value addition in mind rather than just generating raw material. And focused on that as flagship pilot examples, you would then take stock at the end of that time and show that the transformation we have been talking about is not alien, it takes this kind of form. And there are technologies that can bring about climate-smart solutions in crop production.
I will invite you to a break, and after the break, why then, if we know the solution and we know the challenges, why we don't address them? Welcome back to the show. In the previous session, we talked about the key prioritization of technologies that Africa could take to improve its agricultural performance. And it seemed to be very obvious to our leadership from all the commitments which were taken. If it is so obvious, why our governments didn't take bold steps to have them adopted and used.
The issue of prioritization is also quite complex, as you understand, especially put yourself in the shoes of politicians. They have to deal with the 101 issues,
So many things, yes.
interests, etc., etc. But then it's also that we live in a situation that is very dynamic. So what you may look to be important today may not be the same tomorrow. So the issue of prioritization, and by the way, the reforms I referred to, one issue was to say we will better deliver if we can identify where do we put our limited resources. The resources will always be limited, yes, and you can't spread them too thinly. But in that process, the issue becomes how do you ensure agility in the system and resilience so that you are able to adapt, having identified where do you start?
Yes.
What is the most limiting issue? And you can look at this from two angles, which usually talk about the supply side, the interventions. But you can also prioritize from the demand side. And actually, this demand side is more compelling and is more politically acceptable, more or less. And what I would say is the three things come up as priorities today for most of our governments, all our governments. Number one is, of course, food security. Whatever you do in terms of interventions should be meeting the need to have not just food, but decent, nutritious food. That is cardinal, because that element is going to impact on everything else, on health, on education, on general well-being, etc., etc. The second one, related to food security, is employment. And I'm sure you can accept that this is the thing that is making our politicians sleepless nights,
yes,
especially for the youth. So our agriculture, in terms of priority, has to respond to the issue of employment, issue of entrepreneurship. And the third one, related to what you mentioned, is how do we produce sustainably? And I talk about the complete value chain, the food system, is production, is processing, is packaging and consumption. So that all value.
When they paint agriculture in Africa, it is dark. Do we have some success stories in Africa where science technology is being adopted and where the farmers are reaping the benefit of its adoption?
Nigeria took a bold step around the turn of the 21st century. Many of you may remember that time we had the leadership in the hands of President Olusegun Obasanjo. And I remember him making a pronounced statement that at the turn of the century, the future will be technological and biological, with biotechnology as a driver of processes. And he didn't leave it there. A following year, he passed a policy to establish an organization called the National Biotechnology Development Agency to promote what biotechnology, the kind of direction Nigeria should take. And what followed then was a policy around innovations called biotechnology, including genetic engineering. This created a climate that enabled the development of cowpea. Cowpea is a major crop there. In fact, they think about it as, a crop rich in protein is like meat. That is affordable to the less fortunate members of the society. So they have developed cowpea that is resistant to pests. And this is now being commercially grown. And if you track it backwards, you can see a political direction followed by institutional arrangement and a goodwill that has sustained all this.
How do we bring in the private sector, private investment to come and fuel a bit those research, adoption and adaptation of research first, and then adoption and use, and later he talked about agro-processing, and then come do agro-processing, add value, and then open the market. This is a way of sustaining.
When you look at successful examples, more recently you find a lot of success in Malawi, for instance, in Kenya as well, on the back of e-commerce platforms in other countries. And these are farmers getting to more commercial entrepreneurship because they're being enabled by digital technologies. And both in terms of financial services, but also access to information, both marketing and the trading information. So that in itself is what is making it happen. So in terms of how do we accelerate that and how do we expand that, this is where actually the question comes in terms of building more engagement and promotion at the level of both policy, as well as in the continent in Africa, we have the whole issue of transnational and regional value chains. So those are actually huge enablers in terms of the size of markets. And what I'm speaking to is your question about private sector, because the whole system essentially has to be seen from a business perspective. We in Africa, especially agriculture, suffered the consequence of agriculture being a social service driven by development aid. But we have to change that to actually get agriculture driven by itself because it can make money for itself as a business. Now there are two things. So we have to look at both the commercial value of the whole system, the whole agriculture, and there is also the social value. Now these two are not contradictory. They can actually go hand in hand. And this is why we're saying that agriculture should demonstrate in Africa the interdependencies between private and public interests.
We need to work in such a way private sector feels that agriculture can have some business prospects.
And it has.
And it has. And so that they can invest in agriculture and the whole value chain to have it sustainable. How do you see the coming in of science and what Africa should take as a direction and prioritization of science and technology during, let's say, the next decades?
I'm actually spoiled for choice because there is this talk of the convergence of knowledge, be it biological, physical, socioeconomic, and they are talking that this is actually, it's already manifesting itself in form of what will be the fourth industrial revolution. We have internet, big data, whatnot. So there are so many things in there. But we started on the platform of agriculture, which you articulated very well as the foundation of economic development in Africa. So if I can keep that script, I think that what I think could drive African agriculture would be something, if I can simplify this, something that would start with quality seed to be planted. This would be a product from science and technology, quality seed. And when you get the seed, it's planted in the soil. So we need technologies that can help revamp our already declined fertility, soil fertility in Africa. And if you have the seed, you have addressed the soil, then the crop will grow. You have addressed production, but you will not stop there with production. The policy comes in, market end, and so on.
Very, very good. Colleagues, let's now conclude.
The issue of agriculture transformation for Africa is an imperative, is urgent. It's like sometimes we say food security is a priority. Food security cannot be a priority. Food security is life. You can't decide today is not a priority. When you look at the transformations in other continents, first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution, they were running on the back of something, natural resources, including steel and all that. We have, as Africa, an opportunity to leapfrog on the basis of technology and innovations, from the digital technologies to other emerging technologies in biotechnology and all that. So we have to be clear about the ambition which we have no alternative. We just need to do it. Number two, we have, as a continent, the means to do it. So let's get it done.
Thank you very much.
We are all in agreement that transformation is what Africa needs. And the key drivers of transformation are two things. Technological interventions that will be groundbreaking, that will transform agriculture from the way we are doing it, and we talked about that in details. But that will have to be twinned with political solutions. And I don't talk about politics here, I mean actually the enabling environment, encompassing policies, regulations, markets, institutions, all other enablers that need to align to make agriculture transform into an enterprise rather than the hobby we have all traditionally known it to be.
For Africa, it is imperative to transform its agriculture, not only for food security, but also for poverty eradication. Yeah. And this calls for income. It means we produce not only for our stomach, we produce also for the market. Mm-hmm. And we need to add value to what we produce. Yeah. I think that is a first key. And that, if I link it to the starting point, that calls for leadership and very clear vision, which is communicated to other stakeholders. And this needs to be very well reflected into policies and regulations, which will then provide the environment for that innovation you are talking about, to come and be adopted by the farmers and other players in the value chain. Exactly. And here we are talking from the farmers, but also the private sector with their capability of transforming this and adding value. We are talking of researchers in different institutions, national agricultural research centers, national science council, etc., and universities. We are also talking of policymakers and decision makers in the governments, respective different departments, but also, I mean, the whole. I don't know how I call it, but it is opinion shapers to change the mindset of people from those ideas of feeding my family being the key objective to now feeding the world being the objective. I think if we do that, then things will be clearer and we can leapfrog, as my brother Martin is saying. And science, technology should work hand in hand with those other key players so that we are able to work together as one in a concerted manner. And this is the whole essence of promoting dialogue on agriculture and agricultural technologies, and also how to bring in science, how to improve policies, regulations, and how to continue to feeding with evidence and data the leadership which will then sustain the support. That is the essence of KIKAO. We will be welcoming different players to come and discuss the challenges we face in agriculture and how we can address them. So, ladies and gentlemen, viewers, let me invite you to the next KIKAO as I thank Martin and Francis for your contribution. Thank you very much.
And now to our science terminology of the week. That's on Science Speak.
Now the word for the week is DNA. That is usually an abbreviation of deoxyribonucleic acid. And this is a molecule inside the cell that contains the genetic information responsible for the development and function of an organism. These molecules allow the genetic information to be passed from one generation to the next. It's actually the reason why you look like your mother or your father.
Yes, so the verdict is out. Science, technology, and innovation are all necessary ingredients in developing and improving Africa's agriculture. But progress will have to be faster. Until next time, My name is Joe Agayo. Thanks for watching Kikao.